Hey everybody, Jeff Schneider here, and today we're going to go over the 5 things I wish I knew when learning how to play in the bebop style. This bebop sound is something that I always wanted to have in my solos. I remember even back when I was a sophomore in high school, I knew some licks, I knew some blues scales and some chord tones, but I still wasn't able to get that bebop sound. Something like this. That's the sound I wanted, and it took me years to get it into my playing, but I'm gonna shorten that timeline for you by showing you the 5 key things that really unlocked this sound in my improvisation. So the first and most important thing has nothing to do with the actual notes. So you don't have to know any music theory to get this most important point down, and it's all about not what the notes are, but how you play them. I'm gonna throw that backing track back on, and this time I'm only gonna play the chromatic scale. So I'm gonna play a whole bunch of notes that don't work, technically speaking, but it's still gonna have that bebop vibe to it, that flavor. So check this out. Think about this 3-dimensional effect where you have some notes that just pop out and are right in front of your face, and then you have some notes that recede and are almost inaudible. Sometimes those are referred to as ghost notes, and of course the notes that pop out, those are called accents. You want those ghost notes to be so quiet that you can barely hear them, and that way the notes that have the accent, you don't even need to play them that loud, just by contrast they will pop out. So get that 3-dimensional effect. Even if you play a wrong note, it's still gonna sound good. But eventually, yes, you're gonna wanna start to focus on the actual notes that you're playing, not just how you play them. So the best way to start with that is by building a foundation and understanding of music theory. So one of the first exercises that I learned that really helped me with this was a very simple exercise. You just pull up a chord progression and you arpeggiate the chord tones. So if you have a B flat major 7, you go up like that, 1, 3, 5, 7. Or if you have G7, you go up like that, 1, 3, 5, 7. And you don't even need to practice it on your instrument. You can just think to yourself, okay, F7, F, A, C, E flat, B flat major 7, B flat, D, F, A. And that's actually a great way to practice it because you're not relying on muscle memory. You're purely using your music theory brain to call out those chord tones. If you want to get a little fancier with it, you can mix up the order of the chord tones. Instead of going 1, 3, 5, 7, you can do 7, 1, 5, 3, or 7, 1, 5, 3, like that. That's a good way to challenge yourself if you want to spice things up. Now, when it comes to scales, in jazz, there are so many scales out there. There's the altered scale, there's different kinds of diminished scales, there's Phrygian dominant, and there's Lydian dominant, and all kinds of crazy stuff. And those scales are good to know down the road, but what I recommend at the beginning is just making sure you're comfortable with your major scales, your dominant 7 scale, and your minor 7 scale. Another way to put that in terms of modes that you might be familiar with, the major scale, also known as the Ionian mode, here it is in B flat. What I call the dominant 7 scale is also referred to as the Mixolydian scale, which is just like the major scale, except you lower the 7th by a half step. So you get this. And I just call it the dominant 7 scale in this case because it's a quick way to remember that that's the scale that you would play on a dominant 7th chord. All right, let's do the final one, the minor 7 scale, also known as the Dorian scale. And it's the same thing that you played before with the dominant 7 scale, that flat 7, but now we're also gonna flat the 3rd. So those 3 scales, the major scale, the dominant 7 scale, and the minor 7 scale, that's a great place to start. But here's the thing, when you're learning these chord tones and when you're learning these scales, it's not to just look up a lead sheet and look at the changes and play random chord tones and notes from the scale. That's not why we learn the chords and the scales. we're actually going to use them for a different purpose, and that's going to come up in one of the later takeaways or key lessons that I'm going to talk about in this video. But before we get to that, we have to go over the third lesson. And actually, before we do the third lesson, I've got this great resource. It's called The Last Chord Scale Charts You'll Ever Need. It's totally free, and it's one of the best ways to not only learn your scales and arpeggios, but actually see how the chords and the scales relate to one another. I lay out all the notes and the chords and the chord functions in such a way that it makes the music theory make sense, and so that you can actually apply it to your improvisation and solo a heck of a lot better because you're using the music theory and not just getting confused by it. So again, it's called The Last Chord Scale Charts You'll Ever Need, linked up for free in the description below. But let's get on to that third lesson, that third key takeaway, and that all comes down to how you get to the chord tones. Here's what I mean. So if we take a B flat major 7 chord, we already talked about the scale that you could play for that. The B flat major scale, of course. We talked about the arpeggio, 1, 3, 5, 7, but it's not the scale and the arpeggio that gives you the bebop sound. One of the key ingredients to getting the bebop sound is something called an approach note, or this target method, where you have a note that you want to land on, and it's all about how you get to that landing point, how you get to that target, how you approach that destination. So say we're on that B flat major 7 chord and we want to approach the third. So if I just play 1, 2, 3, 4, that's a D on beat 1. That's not a bebop line. That's not a cool lick by any means, but we're going to dress it up now. So instead of just coming on that D on beat 1, let's approach it from a half step below. So check this out. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, a little more interesting, but still doesn't really sound like a bebop line. All right, let's dress it up a little bit more. Now, instead of just doing a half step below, I'm gonna also do a half step above, then a half step below, and then I'm gonna land on the target. 1, 2, 3. So I'm starting on beat 4 now. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1. Okay, we're approaching the D, we're targeting the D, and we're getting there via this approach note sequence of a half step above the chord tone, a half step below the chord tone, and then landing on the chord tone. I can do the same formula approaching the fifth of the chord. The fifth is F, so we'll do half step above, half step below, and then land on the fifth. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1. Okay, let's dress it up even more. Check out this approach. It's a little longer, and it's gonna get more into that bebop sound. I think you'll recognize this. 1, 2, 3. All right, so all that is a longer approach. Check it out again. 1, 2, 3. So I'm starting a whole step above the target note. Remember, the target note is F. So I'm starting a whole step above F, or one note above F. In this case, it's G. Then I'm going a half step above the target. And then I'm going a half step below the target. And then I'm landing on the target note. 1, 2, 3. All right, let's do the same thing approaching the root, B flat. 1, 2, 3. I can even link those two up together. I'm gonna target the root, then the fifth. It sounds like this. Or how about this one? So now I'm targeting what note? I'm targeting the third, D. I'm starting a half step above, then I'm going a whole step below, and going chromatically up until I land on my target. If I put all three of those together, I get this. I'll do it again, exaggerating the phrasing this time. You hear how there's that contrast between soft and loud, but I'm also using chord tones. I'm targeting the root, I'm targeting the fifth, I'm targeting the third, and I'm targeting them with these approach note sequences. So now you can see how just by combining a few of the lessons we've already learned, we're already creating bebop sounding lines. But it doesn't stop there, because now what we have is the foundation of understanding the parts that you can put together to create longer lines that go beyond just approach notes. So what I'm talking about here is learning vocabulary, because if you want to get the bebop sound, you have to learn bebop vocabulary. Vocabulary is another way of saying licks or lines or material that is emblematic of the genre of music that you want to learn. So if you want to play in a blues style, you learn blues licks. If you want to learn how to play in a bebop style, you learn bebop licks. It's not rocket science, but when you have these chord tones, these scales, these approach notes in mind, when you go to learn a lick, when you go to build a vocabulary, it's going to be much easier to not only learn it, but memorize that lick, because you'll recognize things like, oh, there's part of that B flat major scale, or there's that approach note thing, or there's an arpeggio. So let's take an example here. Let's say I play this line, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. All right, one more time, a little slower. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So we're starting off not with just some random notes, we're going up the arpeggio. This is a B flat major 7 chord. I'm going up the arpeggio 3, 5, 7, 9. It's a lot easier to remember arpeggio up from the 3 to the 9 than memorizing, okay, we have a D, an F, an A, and a C, or even just a 3, 5, 7, 9. That's way more information than you need to keep in mind at once. It's too much information. Just remember, we're arpeggiating up from the 3 to the 9. And then from there, we're gonna go down the scale. The B flat major scale. See, we're combining arpeggios, scales. Now check out this right here. We're targeting the F. We're playing this F sharp here, or this G flat. That's a half step above our target. You could even say the B flat is the first target, the F is the second target, and then finally, we do that D there as our third target. And we approach that with the same approach note sequence that we did earlier, half step above, whole step below, chromatic up, until you land on the target. And you can even practice this lick in those 3 parts. Part 1, which is an arpeggio up from the 3 to the 9, and then you land on the 1. From there, we're going to go down the scale and use that approach note to get to our 5th. Our final piece of the puzzle is that approach landing on the D, or the 3rd of the chord. Why do we talk it out like this? Why do we break it into these mini parts? And that's where key takeaway number 5 comes in, which is all about speed. So in order to improvise with vocabulary like this, you have to know it so well that you can play it without thinking, by practicing them fast. And I don't just mean by playing as fast as you can so that your fingers are like blazing, through your keys. That's kind of part of it, but really what it comes down to is being able to think quickly. And the way that you train yourself in order to think quickly is by practicing exercises like transposing a line in all 12 keys. And what makes that so much easier is leveraging your understanding and knowledge of music theory, so that when you go to a new key, it's not such a big deal to arpeggiate from the 3 to the 9, because you already know that arpeggio. If we go into the key of C major and I go up from 3 to 9, there it is right there. And I resolve to the 1, and then I go down that C major scale, and then I do that chromatic passing note, the approach that lands us on the 5 of the chord, and then I do that approach. I'm targeting the 3rd, remember, with that approach there. Half step above, whole step below, chromatic up, until I land on the 3rd. And then what I would do is take that lick and go through all 12 keys and do that quickly. Do that as fast as I can, because that's what's going to build up speed. That's what's going to challenge you to think so quickly that you don't have time to think, so that when you do go to improvise, you can play a lick like this and it's just going to come out without you having to do anything consciously. Of course, you're still thinking. There's still stuff happening in your brain. It's just on a subconscious level, because you've learned the material so well that you don't have to think about it consciously. So to finish out, I'll play this demonstration lick in a few different keys. Here it is in B flat. This is the one we started with. Here it is in C major. I'll just go up whole steps. Here it is in D major. Let's work it out really quick. I know I'm playing D major. Let's just do a quick review of that scale. Okay, now I go to the 3rd, arpeggiate up, land on the 1 there, do that chromatic passing tone between the 6 and the 5, and then I do my approach to the 3rd. Put it all together. Let's go up another whole step to E major. Quick review of the scale. This is why you have to know your scales, because you can quickly transpose a lick into any key that you want. Let's do the arpeggio now. Let's do an arpeggio from the 1. 1, 3, 5, 7, all the way up to the 9. And now let's go 3 up to 9. Resolving down to the 1. From there, we go down to the 5, with the chromatic passing tone between the 6 and the 5. This is part 2. Part 1, part 2. Part 3 is the approach that lands on the 3rd. The 3rd is G sharp, start a half step above the G sharp, jump to a whole step below the G sharp, and chromatic up until we land on the 3rd. Put them all together. That's how you transpose. You kind of talk it out, you break the line into parts so that when you do learn a new line, it's not just random notes, you can actually see chunks of information. It's like putting letters together to form words, and then those words become sentences. But you have to be able to organize the letters into words, and music theory is your ticket to doing that without having to rack your brain and memorize a ton of different individual notes. And last but not least, if you want a whole collection of my favorite licks in this classic jazz style, I have a whole collection. It's called Sick Licks, and I have them for beginners. This is level 1. That's the classic level 1 collection. And then I actually have a level 2, which is more for intermediate and advanced players. You can hear samples to see which is the right fit for you. You can check that out linked up on the screen and also in the description below. And when you're done with that, you can check out this video here for some more tips on how to improve your soloing and improvisation. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.